You've trained for the rat race your entire life. And yet, the minute you started, you were told that the goal is to try and get out of it. Well, now might be your chance. Fractional remote job opportunities are popping up everywhere now. Your shackles of professional monogamy are loosening. You could have many employers, be your own boss, and leave behind the meaningless perks and inherently transactional mistrust of your productivity. But where do you even start? No one taught you how to set out on your own. And what if it doesn't work out? If you've been considering fractional project management work, either as a practitioner or as an employer, keep listening. We're going to be hearing from someone who's lived it and talking through how you can make the right decision for you. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. My name is Galen Lowe with the Digital Project Manager. We are a community of digital professionals on a mission to help each other get skilled, get confident, and get connected so that we can amplify the value of project management in a digital world. If you want to hear more about that, head on over to thedpm.com/membership. And if you're into future-forward conversations and practical insights around digital project leadership, consider subscribing to the show for weekly episodes. All right, today we are talking about fractional project management roles and whether a fractional model might start to be as common as, or maybe even replace, full-time opportunities in the foreseeable future. With me today is Michael Gold, fractional project management thought leader and founder of the Fractional Hub, a community for fractional professionals. Michael, thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I say this to a couple of people who have been on their podcasts. I told you before, I cannot do the concept of a face-to-dialogue type monologue sort of thing. And so that spiel at the beginning, I mean, well done. It's a mouthful, but you've done it well.
Thank you. Congratulations to you as well. We were talking in the green room. You just launched a sort of more premium tier of the Fractional Hub. You were up late. You were doing the launch. A lot of my listeners can relate to exactly how that feels. But congratulations on launching that and getting it done.
Thank you so much. I apologize in advance for any of your listeners. Not that they would know any different because they've never met me, but I was up till 3 a.m. and I actually can kind of see it in my eyes right now. So I will try and stay with it and do something sort of coherent.
It's okay. It's going to make you hyper relatable to this audience. I think like I was saying to you as well, like this notion of fractional work, it's not necessarily new, but I think it's been coming up in a lot of conversations in the context of project management for me. A lot of folks in my community have been sort of talking about it, asking about it. And I thought maybe we could just dive in. And I have like a multi-pronged question. And I think this is the question that's kind of like, that keeps coming up in my conversations, because fractional used to be a term that I mostly see for like executives, right? Like fractional CFOs and fractional CMOs, et cetera. And now we are seeing it in project management. So I thought I'd just ask, what does the word fractional mean to you? And how is it different from part-time contract work or freelance work, especially in the context of project management?
Interesting question. And also just to say that you say you know about sort of a different context of fractional, you knew it as CTOs and stuff. I think you're already massively ahead of the curve. I mean, obviously, maybe over the last 5 years in the US and stuff, it is a thing, like particularly in the UK, the idea of a fractional CTO is still relatively new to probably most people.
Huh.
So it's still like on the verge of, which is kind of the fractional hub, it's not specifically at PMs or anything. But back to your actual question, I guess one of the things I think of in terms of the project management is one, like you were saying, it's executive level, it's strategic. And so obviously you can have that in project management. So whether you're saying like a PMO or you're coming in to solve their processes or something specific, value-based, rather than just your hours to manage a project, then it can get more nuanced than that. And I think this is where we're starting to see like loads of different definitions of like what fractional means. I think people are fighting out. I started calling a new term, maybe John, but it's fractionally freelance. So it's the concept of freelance, task-based roles, normal sort of things, but multiple part-time contracts. So it's not on that strategic level, but it's a part-time contract done in a way that historically we couldn't do. I've not seen project managers, whether full-time or in a contract. 99% of contractors are 5 days a week, 3-month contract, get the project done. So even if we're not talking at that strategic level that we sort of associate with the CTO fractional community, we are still seeing a shift in ways of working where you've got a PM who now can do 3 clients a week, 2-3 hours a day, particularly with the whole concept of remote working. I mean, I work at points, 3 clients, they're all on teams, I bounce around from different teams, I have all my emails in one sort of inbox. To an extent, it feels like one expanded client, which is very different ones in completely different areas. So I think that's the big shift, is that we're now seeing like fractionally freelance. And I think that's what's really taking off. But like I said, you can still be a strategic project manager. You can still be head of a huge transformation project and only be there 1 or 2 days a week, while you've got all these other PMs sort of maybe below you working 5 days a week. You don't necessarily need the head of the program management team or the PMO to be there 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the like interesting theme. And like, I think that's what, don't quote me on this, but what I was seeing in the fractional like executive area, it was either people who have like kind of retired, but then they're kind of come back to do a bit of work because they loved it or they can't put it down for whatever reason. And it combined with this notion that some organizations don't need or don't think they need a full-time CFO or don't think they need a full-time CMO because they've got other, senior leaders taking care of stuff. But sometimes they just need someone to come in and do the strategic thinking and leverage their experience to like rally everyone together. But they're like, we don't need you 40 hours a week. And then, that exec is like, that's fine. I didn't want to show up for 40 hours a week. And that sort of happened. And then project management, I think it actually makes a lot of sense because I hear that a lot from organizations, especially ones who are just trying to start their project management practice. They're like, I can't hire a PM right now. I don't have enough work to fill 40 hours right now. And then I've got added headcount, I've got to pay a salary. And then I'm going to feel all the stress of like having enough projects for them to work on because, the 1 or 2 wouldn't fill a 40-hour week. And I know there's a whole bunch of like sensibilities around project management as a practice and as an art form and its value in business. But I totally get that, right? It's like, instead of like dragging your business along until you get to this point where you're like, finally, I can afford a full-time project manager. Now we can get serious about projects. You can actually bring that in earlier. And then what I like about what you said is like, that can still be a strategic person. We'll get into that later in the conversation as well. But I think that's for me, the magic sauce. I like the word you used, fractionally freelancing, because that's kind of where it's at for me. Is like, I know a lot of freelancers and the range is broad, right? Some folks are just like, I do task management. I just get it done. I do volume, right? I can do a lot of different projects for a lot of different clients. And then there's folks who are like, I'm good at like leading a project, but also giving like strategic advice. I'm almost like a consultant at the same time. And yet we use the same word for it. So it's this really interesting emerging notion.
And to what you were saying before as well, though. So obviously you've got a company you can't potentially have 40 hours a week, but also so you can bring on someone at a strategic level because you haven't got a PMO. You haven't got anything. So if you brought someone on a discounted rate, and by discounted rate, I just mean on a couple of days, the rate would still actually be good, but you know what I mean? That person, because you wouldn't want to necessarily hire someone full time if you didn't know where you're going to grow, but you might want that person to come in, set the structure short term to at least allow you to then start hiring freelancers. Because you can't just get a freelancer in. You might not feel comfortable to get a full-timer, but you can't just randomly bring in a freelance PM. There's so many examples in just that sense that it makes sense to go after a strategic fractional project manager, get them to set it up. And then if you want longer term, bring in freelance project managers or fractionally freelance project managers. And, it gets convoluted and people will laugh and say, do all these definitions about it. But I think if you do wrap your head around them, they do make sense. It's worth learning about. And the only other point I would add is we're talking about the companies who can't afford it or whatever, maybe it's their first one, but it's also where's the tipping point in terms of, say you've got 3 project managers and they're all working and you've got like one extra project. What do? Do you do the classic thing, which is what most organizations do, which is just chuck it at the person who's already too busy? And then they burn out and there's all the complications there and productivity goes down and all. Or do you think, oh God, historically I can only hire a freelancer 5 days a week on a 3-month contract. This is not that as a project. So now you can just get someone in a day a week and they'll be happy to do it because they're working for 3 other clients as well. And with remote work, there's not, I'm not going to come in on a Tuesday, look at your project, and then I'll ignore you for 4 days. It's, I will do a little bit every day alongside the rest of my work. And again, we might go into this, but even when people get booked on a day a week, or I get booked on, I would say 8 days a month or something, in my mind, that's an easy way for procurement to understand maths. Okay, he's on 8 days a month. But the reality is they don't know when those 8 days are going to get done. I'm working with multiple different clients. There'll be a week where I flex to 3, a week that I flex to 1. But am I specifically always doing exactly 8? I think it's slightly irrelevant because it forces them. They can't timesheet check on me. There's no micromanagement in that sense because Tuesday at 4 p.m., I have another client or I'm at the gym. the two are like the same. They literally can't tell. So all they know at the end of every week or the end of every month is, did we think Michael did a good job? And I think it's really good from a psychological point of view for them as well, that it stops them worrying about feeling ripped off. Like they said, if you're a full timer and someone just goes on a 3-hour lunch,
Right.
why is Jeff gone on a 3? You can't just do that in the middle of the day. Even if Jeff's doing everything fine and all his projects are hitting their targets, they would just, well, I feel like maybe you could have taken on more. Your reward for being efficient and amazing is more work, which is insane to me. So at least this model goes, well, look, we can't track them, so we're not even going to try. We know we've roughly got these 8 days because that's what we think it will take. But if you're really efficient and you do it in 4, they signed up to an 8-day retainer. Like, who cares for both of you? Like, the guy's getting rewarded. You're getting an efficient, good project manager. I mean, the argument on the flip side is, what do you want him to arbitrarily take longer, which also will mean he will respond slower to client emails and everything will be slower. So I can't imagine you would encourage that. This kind of just lets them accept it, I think. It stops that micromanagement, that innate thing inside you that wants them to all agree. They just don't have a choice. I think it just focuses everyone a lot better.
Yeah, I like that sort of like the value mindset is like, do I feel like I'm getting 8 days a month worth of value from Michael being involved with our organization? And then it sort of satisfies that procurement box, like you said, right? It's like, how do we measure this? Okay, well, it's like the equivalent of 8 days. Is it going to be just Monday and Thursday? No, actually, like you said, merged inbox. You're just there. You're just treating multiple projects from different organizations like they are just the project that you're managing. Like most project managers are managing multiple projects. It's a nice way to sell it in. And then that other thing I just want to come back to, which I thought was just so apt, is that, yes, there's a lot of organizations in growth mode reaching that point where they need a PM and they're like, cool, we'll just like get a freelancer and everything's going to be fine. But if you haven't set up that structure, or if you're not bringing someone in to set up that structure, that's not necessarily going to succeed. And it's probably going to fail because it's never been done before at your organization. You can't just throw a pebble in the water and just like think it's going to fix everything. It needs someone to come in and set things up. And that's kind of where my head goes when I'm like thinking about like the Fractional Hub and your community of folks who are fractional. Generally speaking, I see it as at least an opportunity for some very senior, very skilled individuals to come in and do strategic work as well as getting the project done to help organizations with their project management practice, not just to like come in and quote unquote herd cats, make sure things get done, move the ball forward, et cetera, et cetera. It can be more strategic than that. And the market is showing that there's a lot of like very smart professionals, very seasoned professionals doing this kind of work. It doesn't have to be just that like someone to fill a gap for a little while. They don't need to be all that skilled. They can be.
I think that's the whole point. Like, freelancers aren't going anywhere in the sense, and they fill a gap. And there are some very accomplished freelancers, and so maybe those freelancers might start looking at the fractional. Well, it's trying to distinguish, I guess, the mix between just that task-based and that more strategic-based role, because otherwise a freelancer is a freelancer, and just because you're a senior PM, it doesn't mean that you're particularly well-versed in the specific thing that they need. So one of the things, well, in fractional, what it allows you to do is really craft your, and I say niche, but I feel like in the, like it's niche, but
I say niche. I mean, I'm here in Canada, so.
Yeah. Okay. We'll say niche. But yeah, really crafting that niche, because there's so many people now in the market. And so if you're making the argument that everyone's more productive, particularly with AI, everyone's more efficient. So now you've got the same amount of jobs in theory, but like everyone is now able to do stuff part-time. What you're then saying is, okay, well, there's no need to have the jack. I don't need like the 5-day a week who's going to be good at everything. Why don't I get 2 or 3 different people, 1 or 2 days a week who can do very specific things and get paid for those expertise? Let us be more efficient in each department. But also, yeah, to stop using that kind of like jack of all trades. So I think that's one of the other things that fractional is going to, the future of portfolio fractional careers and very hard niches, because there's just less of a need for a generalist. I only want to caveat my point that there is still going to be a need for generalists. I just think it's going to become that in itself. I think that will become a niche, as stupid as that sounds. But like, everyone goes niche. Eventually, the generalists, there'll be a much smaller pool of them. And they in themselves will find these organizations who actually do benefit from having a generalist. So I think it will go both ways and things will swing back and forth. But niching is the way at the moment.
Let's go there, because I think that where the conversation goes for a lot of the folks I'm talking to is like, what does the future hold? We're recording right now. It's April 2025. And honestly, like, it doesn't take more than a minute of scrolling through anyone's LinkedIn feed to realize that, like, there's this like diminishing trust in long-term full-time employment. And I think I'd say my opinion is that no one is under any illusions anymore about working for the same company for their entire career and getting the gold pen and getting the watch and then retiring. Meanwhile, the thing you mentioned, right? Like, the economy is pretty tough right now. AI is causing disruption in good and bad ways. There's like geopolitical factors, and it's putting a lot of pressure on companies to like do more with less. Some of these scenarios where we're like, we can't afford to hire someone and maybe we only need them for part-time, not full-time. But also like fewer roles are available. There's like layoffs happening in almost every sector. My big question is fractional a temporary answer for a temporary problem? Or do you think it's actually like the way of the future?
I've done like a fair amount of research on this. And I think something like by 2027, there's expected to be, I think it's 57% of I think it might just be the US workforce, but there's plenty of other stats around the rest of the world, will be freelance in some form. So it's already shifting massively towards the fact that most people will be freelance. And that's not like in the last year or something. That's been an ongoing shift for like a decade. I spoke to a recruiter the other day. I thought it was, he said it had gone from 3 years. Now the average lifespan of a career employee is 2 years. So that means around 18 months in, you're looking for your next role. If 2 years is when you go. So we're already at the point that a full-time job is just an extended freelance contract. We have already shifted to that. The whole that we're secure, you're not, we're all having portfolio careers. They're just under a different name. And so I can't see why the shift wouldn't continue. I can't see what logic anyone could have. AI is only going to get better. People are only going to get more efficient. The argument that why you would want to keep employee generalists, like, it just doesn't make sense to me. You're going to get more specialities. You're going to get more productivity. The idea that war and the world and the economy and everything is ever going to suddenly magically get better. It's like all of that is heading towards an idea that portfolio careers is definitely going to be like the future. And I think by like 2030, 2035, it genuinely would shock me if people still thought of full-time work as like the normal thing to do. Gen Z and whatever the other young generation is, I've forgotten. But the young people of today is no longer me. There's already studies and surveys. None of them want full-time work. Like, it's the thing. And people can look at that like flippantly and go, lazy so-and-so, or whatever it might be. And every generation looks at one before them and says the same. But the ultimate thing is that's just the way that work is going. And I mean, I'm above them and I'm going, good on them, I think. I just think with the rise of technology as well, the fact that I'm starting the Fractional Hub, the fact that you have your community, the fact that anyone can make any company at any moment that they want, that's only easy. So I just see a future where everyone has a micro business. Like, why would you need to be the big players? Like, even like companies like EY, for instance, hundreds of thousands of layoffs at the moment, and they're shifting, and they're now being much more open to fractional work. And PwC as well have done reports, Deloitte as well, loads of reports that they're all going to start using fractional work. And then I know a lot of fractional consultancies popping up. So you start to look at the idea of going, even companies like EY, in a decade, I can't see why you're not going to get another one like that. I don't know why you would, because there's just going to be so much saturation in the market, but in a good way, where everyone has this ability to go and be the next EY, but at least on a micro scale. Because you get 200 grand, 300 grand a year. You don't need to be the 40 million pound company. You can quite easily scale, I think, a 500,000 to £1 million little one, and you'll just get like 40.
I love that statement. This notion that the big four or whatever, we refer to them as, they're these giants. They're like monoliths in the industry. They're like almost untouchable. And that idea that actually you might be able to be the next one, right? Like, it's just like, it opens the aperture, I think, a bit on like what the opportunity is here. I wanted to come back to that, the younger generation bit about it, actually for anyone really, because like arguably the way we sort of train people, our education model, like it almost pushes us in the direction of like getting that full-time job. And I know a lot of folks who are exploring freelance or they're becoming fractional, they didn't go to business school. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't think of themselves as an entrepreneur. They didn't have a contract that was like bulletproof, like in their back pocket to start going out and doing fractional work. How does someone get started? How do you get started? Well, how did you get started, I guess I should say. And also for folks who are looking at this right now, no matter what generation they belong to, like, what are the skills that they should have? What are the resources they should have to kind of take on what is currently, quote unquote, unorthodox or non-traditional in terms of the way we look at work, and yet a massive percentage of people in the workforce are actually doing this or exploring this?
Yeah, it's a really valid question, because I think there is a tendency for people to jump on a trend without necessarily understanding what it is and throwing everything at it. And I wouldn't advise that. And so, like, due diligence is due. How I got into it, I mean, to be honest, it's such a mix of things. So, like, I always grew up quite entrepreneurial. So you talked about that type of mindset. I always thought that was going to be the type of thing I did. And then in one reason or another, as I got older, that kind of got scared out of me, in the sense of like the risk and like everything. So I just never quite did it. You know, my dad owned companies and stuff, and that was always like where I thought I'd go, and I didn't. And so this has like probably been the lowest entry barrier version of that. Like, I'm not getting a big product. I'm not investing millions. You know, it was very much me. It's a few $100 a month, but it is a business that I can scale and grow. It felt like a low barrier to entry in that respect. But even then, I had to get pushed fairly far. Like, I went into this and I don't know where to say. The backstory of this is I was a digital nomad for a bit. I did go down to a 3-day-a-week contract, which was my first part-time contract, never knowing what fractional was or fractionally freelance. I guess it started there. Did that for 20 months, came back to the UK and did the thing I said I would never do, which was get back up to 5 days a week and full-time employment and stuff fairly quickly. To be honest, I gave up on that dream very quickly. Did that for about 9 months, got promoted into a role at a different company, which about 5 years before that would have been like the dream. Like, you know, I was a head of a PMO, really large organization, and miserable, really miserable. And so I was on a 3-month probation, which I passed, and they wanted to put me on 3 months notice, as in to have a 3 months notice period. Do you know what I mean? As in, I'd get the job, but to leave, I'd have to give them 3 months.
Right.
And
okay,
that's yeah. So, and that, not the extension of probation, but just, to give, I'd have to give 3 months to leave. And that just freaked me out. I felt so locked into a place that I really didn't like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The people were lovely and everything. Like, if anyone's listening to this, it wasn't like a personnel issue or anything like that. I just didn't enjoy it. So I basically bought a house, and a week after buying a house, quit, because I just had to get out. So I was just really fortunate that I had a bit of the, you know, everyone says have 6 months of finances, or I knew a bit, didn't really plan it, but it was there. And I had a good network, and I kind of just started freelancing, and just it spiraled. And every step it was learning more and more. And I'd find these personal branding experts, and I took a course and I started learning about that, and just kind of found my way. And then maybe 6 months in, found the term fractional. And honestly, we spoke about this like before, from where we had first spoken a few months ago to now where we are now, and the progression, because I basically found this thing that was like my calling, in the sense of that is exactly how I want to work, how I've always wanted to work. The whole notion of productivity over timekeeping. Like, again, I tell like an anecdote of my first ever real job, and had my back to back ears like the CEO, and I'm just like doing my job. I was on probation, done all my tasks. I was like on Facebook a few times throughout the week. And he came over to my manager to say like, hey, your new guy keeps getting on Facebook, like have a word. My manager just moved my desk, like where I sat. So I then sat like on the other side of the desk, like looking at the CEO, so he couldn't see my computer. He came out and said like, I know what you've done, you know, you're going to have a word with him. And in front of me, when he's done everything he's meant to do, he's actually exceeding expectations. Stop annoying. I literally had to go at the manager, but jokingly, like, but I was like, stop having it to go away. That was like 12 years ago. And it always stuck with me the whole career. I was like, the only person I met who really stuck up for that idea of like productivity. And so fractional, like, is that. So I like dove straight into that, took it on completely. But then I set up the Fractional Hub, because as I started posting, and like you described it, thought leader, like the kind of like posting on LinkedIn stuff, I started getting loads of people interested, having never heard of it. People like you, I know a project manager, recruiter as well, who didn't understand the notion of like, how can project managers do this? Spending so long on so many like coffee calls, because I didn't want to be rude. It's nice to network, but it really got to like a point of like every day, there was like another person, another couple of people. I just have 30 minutes and stuff. And I met some amazing people. But it just ultimately, in one hand, became way too much. And on the other hand, it felt like an opportunity to be like, someone needs to create like a space that sort of educates people. And so that's why we initially launched free. We had like a course that you could take, but the community itself is free. And then, as you said at the beginning, we've now launched like a paid tier because it's a little bit more like we'll have some masterclasses and some like group coaching and a little bit more like hands on for the people who really want to take it like quite seriously. But if you're just like, oh, I don't really know what this is, and let's check it out, it's like some free resources and meet some people and then see where you want to go.
I love that because it is like a journey. And like you said, like your background is more entrepreneurial, right? You have like the sort of an entrepreneurial mindset, I guess, right?
Mm.
And not everyone has that. And so they might want to explore first. And then the thing you said, which I don't know, I personally attribute this to an entrepreneurial mindset, but you said I learned little by little here and there. I like took a course and what have you. Basically taught yourself in quite pressurized situations where, you know, it is doing the work and you're like, gosh, I probably should have added a clause to my contract for this, or I probably should have taken, you know, a course on personal branding before I did this thing. Just like these little mistakes that you kind of have to figure out yourself. What I love about the community aspect is that we can sort of combine that knowledge together so that we don't all have to independently learn by making little mistakes or big mistakes, that we can kind of share that knowledge. And I think that's what's really valuable, that everyone's on a bit of a different journey, starting from a different place in the path. But, you know, if we're aggregating some of this knowledge and we're being clever about almost like creating the new model to prepare people for a career in fractional work rather than full-time work, I think that's a really cool idea. So I'll definitely link to it in the show notes. I know we're talking a lot about Fractional Hub, and I haven't really asked you to define it. You know, I think it's how you just described it is pretty clear. I honestly, I think it's like a really interesting, almost wave that you're riding that I think will head into the future.
Yeah, and we had like just alluding to that, like the helping the community out kind of aspect that you were talking about. We literally had someone today have an example of someone, and this isn't like fractional specific, but it doesn't have to be. Everyone's on a journey. Everyone's just supporting each other. Obviously, we have specific forums cater to one thing, but this was just a woman who, a client who seems to have like someone who has technical difficulty. I don't know, someone who's not particularly technically well versed. And so was on emails, struggling with the emails, shifted her to WhatsApp. And then within that, couldn't open like a document that she needed. And was basically just asking about like, it's feeling like her pricing's now going over what she's asked for. And it was like the kind of thing of like, how do I deal with this? My pricing is kind of escalating because the hoops I'm having to jump through now are like not what we initially agreed. So there's just a few people who kind of got back and was like, you know, talking through kind of the red flags of like, it's okay to step away from a client, but also at the same time being like, but if you're not going to step away, this is how I'd approach like the next steps. And just having that sounding board with a few people to come and support something, like that was like really nice to see today. And
I love that. It's a situational knowledge, right? And like in the moments that I think is a great support. And, you know, the fractional thing, it can be lonely, I imagine. It's kind of just you, it's your own business. For a lot of folks, they're not sort of orienting towards, yeah, maybe eventually I'll have a team. They're just like, I am solo, but that can be really isolating. And there's already a loneliness pandemic coming out of, well, the other pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and our ways of working are different. There's remote, and I think community, it's like, it's such a nice thing to have that community and to have that support rather than feeling like you're alone, that like fractional means solo and alone. So I really love that. I was wondering if maybe we can kind of like talk about almost the pitch. What's resonating with me, you said it was like hard to go back to full-time work. And I've heard that from a lot of folks too. And then you kind of described this sort of like, I'm paying you for your time, so you better not be on Facebook, even if you got all your tasks done. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the sort of attitudes and opinions on full-time work are sort of stemming from, in terms of, you know, like maybe not necessarily opposing it, but saying that maybe it's a little bit dated now. But then organizations maybe are not prepared to either procure or think about fractional as part of their staffing model. I wonder if we could talk benefits and trade-offs. So like for employers, and I guess for like fractional PMs who like need to like pitch their value, like what are the benefits and maybe what are the trade-offs to like be mindful of for like having fractional project managers?
so I guess it depends on, are you a remote or non-remote company? So, I mean, I personally would be remote even if I was full-time. So I'm very much on that model. And that's a huge culture war that we're all kind of in. And it depends on which side of the fence you sit on. if you sit in a remote world and the companies that are hiring you are remote, then I think there's very little negative because you work 5 days a week and you just do the work that's actually required to do and you get paid accordingly. I mean, there's an argument to say that if you were working 2 days a week, you'd probably get paid maybe what they would pay someone else, the equivalent, like 3 days a week. So they would say, well, you're earning 33% more. But they're also paying nobody, the other 2, 3 days, no one's working. So they're saving 3 days and they're giving one of those saved 3 days to you. So you're benefiting one, they're saving two. Even if it was 50-50, the point is you're both one. You've just saved them 20% of their costs and you've got to increase your costs 60%. And from a knowledge point of view, I'm working with multiple tools, multiple different people. My knowledge of like trends and different tools and how different people are working and how I can learn from different people is so much more agile and adaptive than this idea that you work in one company and you just stagnate the same people doing the things wrong that have always been done wrong. You just keep doing it. Like, I need to go and find the best bits from all these different companies, take on little bits and then take that to the next company, which I think is like a really fantastic way. So I'm constantly learning way more than I ever would be if I was just in 1 week, I'm working for 3 companies. Like,
right.
So that knowledge level is huge. So from that basis, I can't see much. If you specifically need hybrid or in-person work, I do actually quite struggle with the idea of with this, particularly in England where we've got like IR35. And so when you're like talking about IR35, the idea that within IR35, what you do outside of it, you're meant to have like control and all of those kind of things. So someone telling you, well, you have to come in the office on these hours. And immediately, like, how is that role? Like, you're already kind of taking away a lot of like the principles of IR35. And I know someone could tell me, okay, wait, this is the line that they're going at. It's on this very thin line. Even though they're controlling you, they're still technically outside IR35 for these other reasons. But you do really like walk that line. And so I think if you're going to try to take advantage of this model, I would try to be open-minded to the idea that remote is probably a more efficient model for that. But if you're not, and you're really saying that they've got to come in, then the drawback would be that it's very difficult to work for multiple clients in the same day if you're in someone else's work. So then if you're 3 days for one company, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that Tuesday and Thursday is like a no touch point day. And it's like, how confident are you? Like the whole idea that my upsell is I'll keep everything spinning a little bit every day. It won't be like a black hole. And so if people have this black hole, for me, it might become a little bit more. But that's, I guess I'm talking on the fractional freelance side. From a more strategic point of view, and the more strategic you are, I think the more like higher up you are, like, it's possibly easier to say, well, I'm kind of working in a silo. I'm working on process documentation. So like I can go in, I can make the appropriate meetings with the people and the stakeholders I need to meet. And on the days I'm not in, nothing's happening because I'm just giving them 10 days a month. But like we said, I'm actually just giving them by the end of 3 months, I'll deliver your process. And so then maybe the office is fine. And so again, there's ways of making there very little drawback. I've purposely not spoken about knowledge transfer because I think at some point you mentioned before we might talk about it.
Well, maybe let's go there now because I think that's the argument I hear a lot. And I'm going to be extreme here, but imagining almost all of the workforce eventually goes fractional and everyone's kind of working for multiple different companies. And then there is that argument about institutional knowledge and culture. You mentioned culture war of remote versus return to office and what have you. And I think some of the argument is probably leasehold and rent and stuff. But also some of it is about, how are we going to have culture if everyone is like remote? And then the institutional knowledge side of thing is like, we need full-time people to retain knowledge about the way we do business, because otherwise it might seem like we're assembling teams and it's like the blind leading the blind, starting from scratch every time because nobody really has that institutional knowledge of how we do things. Is the sort of argument about institutional knowledge and culture, like if you were to play this out so that maybe most of the workforce in a company is actually fractional, is that going to be a challenge? This whole who knows what about the way we do business, who's retaining the knowledge, and how do we tackle that?
I guess there's a couple of things on that. Firstly, if you're relying on people to be your knowledge transfer, then I think you've already failed. Because that's more, well, that's the question of what are your processes? What's your sort of internal documentation and onboarding processes and all of that? And yes, you could say, well, not everything can be put. And I think that's a weak argument because what are you going to do when the person who's been there for 20 years does eventually? If you have an answer for that, then maybe it's better to prepare more regularly than wait for the 20-year thing to go, oh, like, what are we going to do now? So I think that, and then part of this whole movement, I guess, is with AI. And I'm already seeing in multiple companies, AI, is now doing most people's note taking. So we've, work in companies, do your note taking. I've got some companies where it's just notes and it ends up in my thing, and that's for me. But I work for an AI company where that's linked to their like Notion account. And so it's automatically like doing loads of things in the background that they've set up loads of things. So then it's not just the tool, but it's the account level of like every, and basically therefore it can summarize, and it's only going to get better. And so the argument there is that AI is probably giving you way better knowledge transfer than anyone anyway. We're getting to a better. So yeah, I mean, that would be my biggest argument there. And then on the culture side, I think a lot of people from my generation down, at least, I don't know how much culture is a thing. And there's all that stuff about, oh, what is culture? Is it a pizza party on a Friday? Like, I already think that we're at a point where it's not as important to people. And I think culture is more just in the way that people speak to each other. And that not just comes from the owner, and if it's a positive atmosphere. Culture comes from not burning out. So if you're working fractionally, you've got these specialists all doing their roles and everything's documented and stuff. And people are just happy to work. I think your culture in of itself will start to be a nice place to work. But at the same time, there's new roles that are going to come from all of this. And there's roles that already do. I know an HR rep, and we spoke about like remote work a lot. And his whole thing is huge on remote. And it's this idea that remote ruins culture. And he always says, that's because you have a full-time, an in-office setup and you just told everyone to go home. Like, it's not that remote doesn't work. It's that you didn't do anything to try to make remote work. They are different things. And there are ways of like saving all the money that you put on your offices. And then maybe on a quarterly budget, take everyone to Spain. I don't know. And let them have like a week intensive bonding session. And you probably find that the culture is 10 times better than it ever was. Because they all got to actually hang out and maybe take a few days off work together rather than beer and pizza and ping pong on a Friday or whatever. Like, I think people see through a lot of that already.
Yeah. And honestly, we have this bad habit as humans to like try and replicate something we did in one context exactly as we have it in another context. So like during lockdown, digital conferences, we're like, okay, well, what's the booth going to look like? Okay, we'll just make a digital booth. And you'll walk by the digital booth and it'll be just like you were there on the floor in the conference center. And turns out that's not what people wanted at all. They wanted a digital experience that did not necessarily, was not like a literal translation of the in-person experience. And I think the same is true with remote culture. I've talked to a few organizations where I get the sense that they have amazing culture as a remote first organization. Some of the things you said, right? They're very transparent about their communication and documentation. Like if you're on the other side of the world, you start your day, you catch up on all the notes from the meetings that happened while you were asleep, and you're up to speed. And like, there's no private conversations that nobody sees. It's like, it's all sort of in public channels. And yeah, to your point, the culture is about getting together in person, or even just the way they collaborate, the energy about the work that they're doing, and not necessarily ping pong tables, beanbag chairs, and the occasional pizza Friday, drinks in the office or whatever.
I've literally just had a thought, which is so stupid, it's going to come to me anyway. But we both own communities, online communities. So the idea that either one of us would believe this idea that you can't create a community of people. And these aren't people getting paid. These are people paying to do part of it. So the idea that like people don't think that you can have a culture purely crafted online. And yeah, a long time I'd love to do some in-person things, but the team are from around the world and where that's going to be and all those kind of things. The point is, that's not promised and they're signing up. Like people sign up because they just want to meet people. I've had so many coffee chats, like I alluded to before, that started this. And I feel like I know these people. I've recommended something for jobs and I get on with them. I message with them all the time. I've never met them. And it's just the modern world. So the idea that like these people who are literally getting paid to be in a building, like that's the only way that they could derive culture. I mean, they're lucky. They're getting paid to be there. Like they're not focused on culture.
Yeah. And then it's up to the company to synthesize quote unquote culture because they're paying these people. And yeah, I think like the sort of thread of steel throughout all of this is that, there's an opportunity right now for everyone to like shake off some of the like old habits or old mindsets and things that we're entrenched in and just be open to something new. And like, like I know that COVID pandemic was not a positive thing, but it was a forcing function for us to think about the way we do things in a different way. AI is doing the same thing right now, where it's like, okay, it's forcing us to think about doing things a different way. Remote, it's forcing us to do things a different way. And yeah, it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong in person or remote, but I think that whole being open to what could change rather than getting stuck in these institutions. And like coming back to that question that we were just talking about, like I use the word institutional knowledge, which uses the word institution, which already seems like an anachronism right now. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, this is not necessarily, we built on these pillars that we feel like are sacred and we can't change, but they might be the things holding us back.
And just on that, one of the stats, and I'll get it completely wrong, but the whole idea of like 5-day weeks, right, was created, wasn't it, for like Henry Ford or something? I don't know, like the automation industry or whatever for factory workers. And then everyone just went, yep, 5 days a week. That's the best way to be productive. And there's so many articles, even in full-time work, where people have trialed 4-day weeks. And in one sense, it's productive, other arguments it's not. But the point is, definitely possible, might not be possible to everyone. And that was before AI was making everyone even more efficient and productive. So again, I just can't see a way where we don't and now start to transition away from this, what is a really outdated model. And I know that sounds crazy because 5 years ago it wasn't outdated. But we are at the fastest moving evolution ever in humanity. Like, if anything, 5 years feels quite slow. And I'm giving forecasts for in 5 years' time, it's going to be a decade of like remote and like 7 years or 8-9 years of AI. Like, I think people really should be preparing for the fact that portfolio careers will be a thing, are a thing. And I don't know, even if you're in a full-time job, like I said, like 18 months is pretty much your time. So like you already are in a portfolio job. And when you start seeing people post on LinkedIn or networking and stuff and think that you don't need to do that, I would argue you do. You are in it, whether you think you are or not.
I love that. I'm going to put you on the spot for one last question, just to kind of bring it back to folks listening who are like, yes, this is interesting. I want to explore this. I'm a bit worried. I don't really know where to start. And I thought maybe I'd kind of flip the question and say, what was that thing that the landmine you stepped on, the thing you wish you knew as you were starting your fractional career, your portfolio career, that like, you're like, I should have thought of this. No one had told me this. I had to figure it out the hard way. No one else should have to figure it out the hard way. Contracting, rates, brand.
I'm going to start with like one because it's so stupid because I'm just plugging a third party tool. But I think there are others. Honestly, when I went fractional, the number one difficult thing I found, and I got to the point of burnout, or close to, I should say, was working for multiple clients and that sort of time mapping sort of exercise that you do. And so I ended up with a tool called OneCal, which is basically, there are, I think I've now found a few, but I struggled originally to find a tool that allows you to two-way sync your calendar. So obviously I can Google Calendar or anything like that. You can add them all in so they pile on top of each other. If you book client A, that doesn't automatically tell client B, hey, at that time, he's this. And so I was working, I think, at one point with 4 clients. And then I also had like just my, company. So people might just set up, those coffee chats I was talking about, or a bit of coaching that I would do. So it's like 5 calendars. But then I'd also have like my personal email, which is like my, whatever I might be doing. And so mapping those things, when at that point, it was one of it almost made me like throw everything away, being like, no, this isn't. And then literally I got OneCal and it's the easiest thing in the world. And so I can't know how much, it's like $10 and it's not a lot. And I can now I book client A and it immediately goes into B, C, D and my personal account and whatever. And it just says private and in brackets, which calendar said it to say like client A in all of them. And then it will say client B did this. That's been the biggest thing because that's the way I specifically work. Other people will say, well, I just work the morning for one client, afternoon for another. I work Tuesday for one client. And maybe that's not a thing. But for project managers, I think particularly the fractional freelancers, again, so if you do the strategy element, you might be able to time box. If you're going to be working on like actual projects and mapping your availability to when a client wants to call in, and it's the hardest thing, it's causing me misery, honestly. So that was number one, I would say. What else is there? I guess number 2, and this is a freelance thing, but I kind of went freelance for only a few months before I was fractional and both and stuff. But it's don't panic and take on every job. because I ended up with, and like I said before, as much as I have the days and the days in my mind equate to output, and therefore I don't feel like uneasy about taking on more or doing less. There was a point where I had like 9 days of work a week. And even if you're doing like 6 days, you just do 6 days a week, and then you do the other three really efficient. Basically, it was too many. There was no way to condense that into like a 5 or 6 day week because 9 days is absurd. So I was working like 7 days, and I was working like 9 hours a day, and maybe doing 8 days and getting the ninth day right down for efficiency and stuff. And that was just like sheer panic. I just got into it. Everyone was offering me a job, and everyone on LinkedIn was telling me it was the worst market ever. And yet I felt good, and it almost felt like ungrateful. Everyone's living this terrible time, and I'm being like, no, thank you.
Yeah, you're turning away work. You feel guilty about it.
And in the long run, that's just not a clever plan.
I actually love how those two things plug together, and I think it's underestimated when people are entering this. We have a lot of conversations about, like legal clauses and scope and negotiation and all that, and those are all important too. But like time and capacity management is an art form. It's a bit different when you kind of control it all. It's hard to say no to work when there's, people knocking on your door and you want to help them, but you have to be realistic and look at how that's going to fit in the time that you have allocated to work, whether you're like, I'm a 3-day-a-week person or a 5-day-a-week person, but to avoid that sort of 9-day week, 9 days worth of work a week. Those are really good tips. Yeah.
I guess my last one would be how important personal branding is, regardless of how sick it makes you feel. It just is. I had a quote I said in another podcast the other day, but I haven't shown my CV in 14 months. It just isn't a thing. I have conversations with people, and I've got a LinkedIn page where you can see my experience. We barely even chat about it. Honestly, I tend to just get a call and someone just says, "Hey, we try." I don't know. Do you want to start tomorrow? And there's no interview, no thing. And it's based on the fact that they obviously look at my profile. I've got a bunch of posts, a bunch of followers. I'm talking vaguely like I know what I'm talking about. My experience, and it's just how I interact on that half an hour phone call. They go, "These things are normal." It's only a 1-day-a-week or 2-day-a-week gig. If he's rubbish, we'll get rid of him. It's a low barrier, but I get the gig because of that. I'm not putting my CV into the recruiter who's got 1,000 people going for it. I can just be speaking to the hiring managers. It's a very quick conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of no's. If someone's not hiring, they're not hiring. As soon as someone's like, "Yeah, I'm hiring," it goes from that to starting with them very quickly without a lot of background checking. It's just, they have a look at my profile. They come to me a lot of the time.
I like that. It's like the asynchronous interview, right? That happens over a span of time instead of, trying to cram all the questions you have about one another into like an hour or like a half day or an assignment, like it's almost this longer getting to know each other period by looking at each other's profiles.
But that's a really good point as well, though, is getting into the branding space, hating everything that you post. Everyone does, don't worry. It's just true. You'll say stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable and you'll panic, but you just keep doing it. And people will talk about like it gets better over time in terms of like your stats just keep posting. But like, I don't even know how true or how important that is. I've had posts that have done like 120,000 impressions, 120,000, yeah. And I've done others that do 500 quite regularly. I get posts that get really high engagement, others that, and if someone DMs me, there's no way people talk about it. And I don't believe that people can say, well, this post generated me 10 leads. I don't know how you equate it to that post. I had a post that day that had like 1 like on it, and a person who's never liked any of my posts offered me a job. So what are you looking for? So I've had posts that do 120,000 because I talked about remote, very divisive topic, very easy. Did that help my career? I have no idea. Visibility, maybe. It's nice to get your name out there. And then I do a lot of pieces that do like 1,000, 3,000 impressions. Yeah, I did like 1 million across a year impressions, but this that is padded out by like a few very high ones. And then most are just like doing whatever. And I don't know which one's doing it. I just know that there's a consistency in it and your name is just out there, and not to worry too much about the actual number, just to keep doing it.
Human scaling things are so funny, right? And that becomes this numbers game. Whereas actually the sort of human connection is just like that thing that Michael said resonated with me. It might have only taken that one post that got 300 impressions for them to be like, yeah, that speaks to me. I'm going to reach out. And then the numbers game is, obviously statistically, you might have better odds to increasing your reach and all this stuff. But it's also what you're saying, I guess, is the other thing.
Who's your market? It's got to go to the right person. And then there's that marketing term, which I don't know if it's necessarily applicable to LinkedIn, but it's the 7 touch points. So it's like you need to engage with someone in 7 different ways to then to actually get in touch with you. And so like whether that's posting, liking their thing, commenting, whatever, it is like a long game. So you will get people who've done it for 6 months and say, I've been following you for 6 months and they never said anything. But apparently they have been. And so I'm just saying like it's a long game. Just keep networking stuff. I mean, maybe I'm just lucky, but stuff just feels like it just happens to me in a sense, but it doesn't. I'm obviously posting and my name's out there, but it doesn't feel like this arduous, like, I don't know, clever networking game. I just put my name out there and just keep putting it out there. And then eventually people message me back and it's like, fine. I was like, oh, cool. Obviously you then have to close. That's a completely different conversation. The networking part is quite easy if you just keep putting yourself out there.
I really like that. Honestly, it's such a fascinating topic. Michael, I really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your knowledge. Congratulations again on launching the Fractional Hub and also elevating it to a place where, you know, you're now developing training for folks who are entering the space of portfolio careers and fractional work. And yeah, where can we learn more about you?
So I guess it's, the fractionalhub.com, very easy website. And then I'm on LinkedIn. I've gone all in. So you'll like this. It's LinkedIn/fractional Michael Gold.
Nice.
Very easy.
Very nice. I will also link it in the show notes for folks listening. And Michael, thank you again for being on the show. Love to have you back and we can dive deeper.
My pleasure. It's been really, really good.
All right, folks, there you have it. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation with over 1,000 like-minded project management champions, come join our collective. Head on over to thedpm.com/membership to learn more. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on thedigitalprojectmanager.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.